welcome to the Muskegon Community College lecture series. Thank you for being here. I'm Andy Wible. This is Ken James.
Hello.
I'll let Ken further introduce himself later. We're each going to present, and then we might have a few more comments between each other, and then we'll open it up for questions. So just raise your question, and I can actually bring you a mic, because we are filming this. And it'd be nice to actually hear on the film your question. If not, I can probably summarize it after you give it. So be thinking about questions as we go along. That's what it is, a conversation. Obviously, one of our panelists is not here, Nicholas Budimir, so we miss him, but we press on. And so Ken and I have kind of expanded, I guess, what we were going to say a bit, given we lost one of our panelists. But if I start talking about sociology, you'll know why. But anyways, thank you for being here. DEI is our topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion on college campuses. And we're going to be looking at diversity on college campuses. Yes, feel free to have a snack and a water. A lot of this has changed, of course, in the last, and we'll talk about that with the new administration. And so the landscape has changed. So I want to talk about what the landscape was prior, how we got here, and then also think about the future and where we might want to go from here, where we're likely to go, where we hope to go. I guess I'm a philosopher, so I tend to think about what maybe we hope we can do. So Ken and I will be trying to do those things as we go along here today. Yeah, feel free to come on in as we go. I'm going to start things off, and then Ken will go. Is that all right, Ken?
I'm just going to move so I can see your slides.
Oh, hey, I didn't think about that, yeah. So I'm going to give a little overview of DEI programs, kind of history here. So the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the United States. It could go back further than what I'm going to say, but this gives us, so this is kind of a condensed, highlighted timeline. DEI efforts somewhat started in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act that prohibited discrimination based on race, sex, and other categories. The EEOC followed in 1972. What's the EEOC? Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Yeah, or it was. That followed in 1972. This Civil Rights Act was, Kennedy started, of course, Kennedy died, Johnson ended up signing it into law in 1964, and then afterwards, President Johnson issued an executive order on affirmative action to encourage equal employment opportunities for underrepresented groups. And when Johnson issued this executive order, so he used the following analogy. He said, we need affirmative action. Affirmative action means that you would give certain unrepresented groups an advantage in order to create or give them equal opportunity. You might say, hey, wait a second. That doesn't sound like equal opportunity. Well, here's his analogy. He said, suppose you have a race. You have two people running the race. All right, let's say we got to get to that wall down here. And the gun goes off, and they start running. And one person gets ahead of the other one. The one's way up here, and the other one's back here, halfway behind. And you say, stop the race. There's a big inequality between these two. Why is that? Well, the one that's behind has a weight tied to his leg. And maybe that's a look back to slavery and whatnot, but that is keeping, that just the past discrimination and current discrimination is keeping them from being able to keep up with the one who's in the lead. And so if we said, let's take off the weight at that point and restart the race, would that be fair with one back here and the other one up here? He said, no, that wouldn't be fair. So if the 1964 Civil Rights Act said we're not going to discriminate anymore, there was more to that in Civil Rights Act, like ended segregation and whatnot in schools. But anyway, but we wouldn't. That wouldn't be fair because that person's already way ahead. And so what affirmative action programs attempted to do was to create an even starting line, so when you did restart the race, you'd be at a point of equal opportunity to win the race, or to get the job, or to get into the college, things like that. Okay, so that was his analogy. All right, hope that makes sense. The 1990s saw an expansion of diversity efforts in colleges and businesses to improve outcomes and opportunities. So, for example, on college campuses, they had things like pride groups, Hispanic organizations, Black student organizations that were a way to help create community and to improve the atmosphere and welcoming nature of colleges and universities. So, 90s. 2000 saw increased training on DEI, things like diversity training, eliminating implicit bias, things like that, to limit discrimination. And the 2020s saw a rise of holistic DEI programs at colleges and businesses. And then in 2021, President Biden issued an order to increase DEI federally. And the biggest point here is that then September 2021, Ken James was appointed Chief Diversity Officer at Muskegon Community College. And we can kind of see how that all came about. And there, he's still here. All right, great. Changes in 2025, though. New administrations in town, or in the country. February 14th, a Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Education says that colleges and universities may not have DEI programs because they conflict with Title VI's prohibition of discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. Remember, we saw that earlier with the Civil Rights Act. And so they're saying it really goes against the Civil Rights Act to have DEI programs. Okay, here's a quote. The department will no longer tolerate the overt and covert racial discrimination that has been widespread in this nation's educational institutions. The law is clear. Treating students differently on the basis of race to achieve nebulous goals such as diversity, racial balancing, social justice, and equity is illegal under controlling Supreme Court precedent. All students are entitled to a school environment free from discrimination. All right? So we're going to eliminate DEI because DEI is discriminatory. Even though, again, the purpose was the opposite. It's discriminatory. And who's it going after? It's going after white males. It's going after people who are not part of the categories that are traditionally recognized by DEI efforts. All right. Asians are, for example, included in that letter quite a bit. Because they have trouble getting into schools because of DEI programs that limit their abilities, because other people are going to get in front of them when DEI is used in getting into schools like Harvard. And so they say the Supreme Court precedent, that was a 2023 Harvard case that went in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that Harvard couldn't use preferential treatment or affirmative action type programs. All right. So universities then and colleges were threatened with federal funding cuts if DEI efforts continue. So they're saying, hey, this is wrong, don't do it, and if you do, we're going to cut your funding. And most all colleges and universities rely on federal funding. So how did Muskegon Community College responded? March 6th, so not too long after, Muskegon Community College decided to pause all DEI efforts and activities to minimize the risk of any interruption of federal financial assistance relied on by MCC students. All right, so we said, hey, we're just getting out of this. And the college changed its mission statement to drop the word equity from its mission, and other language supporting diversity was removed from the college website and even the walls of the college. I think someone came into my room and snatched out the old mission statement and put in a new one. It's like, we don't want it anywhere. 2 full-time staff, one, Ken James right here, and DEI were reassigned to other positions within the college. All right. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn it over to Ken. So that's my brief history. I'll come back and give some more philosophical arguments around DEI and why some of this has happened. But Ken's first here, or next. And, let's see, we'll do that.
Thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken James, and I currently serve as the Chief Compliance and Title IX Officer at Muskegon Community College. And no, this is not my last slide, this is my first slide, because I want you to know that I'm very transparent. And I'll start by saying, you're going to have questions. Contact me. You know, we're going to be able to talk through any questions that you may have, and I'll also have the end of my slides as well. So my opening remarks consist of this. So one, at Muskegon Community College, we encourage freedom of expression and free speech. I just want you to all be aware of that. But I also, my own mantra, say we can do that through civility. And my personal mantra, and those of you that may have heard me present before, are the 3 Ds. And those 3 Ds stand for discourse, dialogue, and dissemination of information. And so one of the things that I encourage is for us to talk, and we can find where we have intersectionality, and we also can find where we can agree to disagree, but we can always do that in a respectful manner. So that is one of the things that I govern myself by. The other thing that I'll share with you as a person, as Dr. Wible mentioned, I was hired as the Chief Diversity Officer of this institution, as a person that has over 30 years of experience advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in a number of entities before I got to Muskegon Community College. I do want to give you this disclaimer because I work for Muskegon Community College. The views I share today are my own and do not necessarily represent the views or the positions of Muskegon Community College. So now that's my disclaimer. So DEI. This might be a refresher for some and new news to others, but when I say DEI, I am referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then you'll see I have one down to the bottom, it's called belonging. So in the 30 plus years that I have been advancing DEI work, the journey was toward belonging. Diversity is defined by me as the differences that make each of us unique. The differences that make each of us unique. So something you might want to consider is a room can look the same and still be diverse. It is our human nature for us when we hear the word diversity to think about the things we can see, like age, race, and gender, which are parts of diversity, but diversity of thought, native language, country of origin, urban, inner city, rural, Catholic, Protestant, atheist. Those are all dimensions of diversity, just to kind of set that tone. And then there's equity, where we seek to ensure the fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness and access to information and resources for all, and that should be done through an environment built on respect and dignity. So that's equity, making sure everybody has opportunity for the same thing. I've done this example before, but I like storytelling and I like analogy. So equity is not to be confused with equal, because equal is the same. So if I was passing out shoes in this room, if I was being equal, I would give everybody a size 14 pair of shoes, because that's what I wear. But if I was being equitable, what size do you wear? Do you need a heel? Do you need a flat? Do you need a hiking boot? Those things. So we don't want to confuse equity and equalness. And then we have the word inclusion, where that is the active intentionality about bringing those things together. And when I was a person that led diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, I would say the journey of that is to belonging. And my final example around belonging, just so you can see that, is when I go visit my parents. My parents are in their 80s. They're twice retired. They live in a small town in Georgia. I visit them a few times a year. And when I go visit them, when I get to their house, and it's not the house I grew up in, but when I get to their house, they don't care if I sleep on the couch or in the spare bedroom. They don't care if I use their car. I don't have to ask to get something to eat. I can just go into the refrigerator and do that. That's the belonging. So the journey that we want, and if I put that through an institutional lens, we want everyone to feel like they belong at Muskegon Community College. That was our journey to belonging. Easier said than done, but none of us should have to check anything that makes us who we are in the parking lot. We should be able to come into this building with it. And that was the journey we were on around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with the title, Is DEI Dead? I answer that question literally when I shape these remarks. Diversity can't be dead. When you look at the word diversity by itself, the differences that make us unique. We are always going to have people that are coming here from different backgrounds. That could be our race, that could be our socioeconomics, that could be our religious preference, that could be our sexual orientation, but that will never change. So diversity can't die, because as long as we have people, we'll have differences. So diversity can't be dead. The future of diversity on college campuses. So with now my understanding that diversity can't be dead, we do have our legislative realities, and Dr. Wible touched upon that. So we made the stance here at Muskegon Community College, and language is powerful. We did not abandon or demolish our diversity, equity, and inclusion here. In fact, I would counter to say we were a leader in that space. We had a person serving in the role that not only did things internally, did things externally. We were a thought leader in this community, in this region, and we touched 4 counties as an institution: Southern Oceana, Western Wible, all of Muskegon, and North Ottawa counties. We were doing work in that space around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we have the reality. That Dear Colleague letter came out on February 14th. We did not want to threaten our just over 5,000 students and our just over 400 faculty and staff, and many adjuncts that I can't name. So when you collectively add it up, we got funding from the feds. Either it was directly from the feds or federal money that funneled through the states. We could not afford to lose that 40%. So we decided to pause, not abandon, not dismantle, but pause our DEI efforts to stay within the guide rails that the Department of Education had given us. I was impacted personally by that. I lateral from the Chief Diversity Officer to Chief Compliance Officer. I had direct reports on my team that had to lateral from their role into other roles within the organization. He's in this room, by the way, to do that. But it's to make sure we did not threaten the viability of those 5,000 students, because that's who we care about paramount. Now, there were other institutions in the state that opted to do different things around that Dear Colleague letter. Everything from I'm not doing anything, come pry it away from my cold hand, to people that I couldn't wait to get something from this so I can just dismantle or abandon. So that wasn't our approach here in this. So I said all that. That was us acknowledging the shift. And then the future of higher ed. There's a national landscape. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, and I brought the wrong sheet over, is higher ed has always responded to changes from the federal government. Here's some things that has happened in the past that we did respond very well to from a higher education perspective. There was the Civil Rights Act that Dr. Wible mentioned. Colleges responded to that. There was the GI Bill that came out, and that created a change in colleges, how that was implemented. We had civil rights and desegregation. We had Title IX. We had the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. All these things have impacted colleges in different ways, but colleges have always responded. So as I sit down and get further remarks from Dr. Wible, I want you to think about how should we respond? What is the greater good? That might mean something differently for each of us, but colleges have always been the place. I opened my remarks with freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Colleges have always been a place where we can have dialogue around this to create that free thinking, to think about what serves each of us, and I will fade back for a moment. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back to my talk here, and again, we'll have we'll have time for questions. I do want to mention just for what Ken said about what the college reaction was to this. I would say I was disappointed. Am I supposed to, as Ken started off, the views that I'm presenting are not the college's, they're my own, and I was highly disappointed, and I think a lot of people were. Maybe you understood it, maybe you thought, well, we have to, but I was really disappointed. I wanted us to be the ones that went, hell no. But we didn't do that because we thought we'd lose funding and we didn't want to be that group. Now, some of the changes I could see that needed to be done, but I think maybe we went overboard in order to, and it sent a message to the community that we only care when it's easy, or something like that. We aren't the real leaders that we should be. So we can handle that in questions too. I'd be happy to answer more. But that's just an initial thought. Arguments for diversity. Now I'm going to look at the arguments against. That's what we do in philosophy. All right. One thing is diversity makes the college better, and this is colleges in general, but also MCC. That when we have it, and this is something that University of Michigan argued when they had in the early 2000s a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court. They said, hey, we want to encourage underrepresented groups on our campus because those underrepresented groups make our school better. They make it better because the discussions are better in the classes. They bring a perspective that we wouldn't have otherwise. And they create, if we don't have that, we have kind of this group think where everybody kind of thinks the same. They feel good about it, but it's actually not very good decision making. And businesses have found this too, that when you have diversity, you actually find that you have better decisions being made. So here's a little research they did once where they had people grouped up into juries, and they listened to the same jury, the same prosecution of the case, and some of the juries were quite diverse in age, race, sex, and other factors, and the other ones were not. And what they found is that the diverse groups did a better job in deciding who was guilty or not than the ones who were not diverse. The non-diverse ones made quick answers. They felt great about it. They thought they got it right. The diverse groups, it was harder. There was more discussion, more dialogue. They weren't as confident, but they actually did a better job than the ones that were non-diverse, that were all the same. So this is an example to support that. And all right. So DEI creates equal opportunity for students and others. This is kind of the preferential treatment or affirmative action can do that. But it also creates opportunities. We have things like the Jayhawk Hub on campus that helps students that maybe aren't as wealthy to get food, and then they have the opportunity to be able to do well. So this is the equity idea of eliminating barriers so students can do well. And that's what DEI efforts, one of the things it focuses on. DEI helps overcome sexism, racism, homophobia, and other biases and discrimination that persist in society. This is what Ken really was focusing on when he was going out in the community and within the college, giving programs, talking about various ways to overcome biases that we have, overcome discrimination, and make a better world. This is kind of, I already mentioned this, but kind of goes with two, I guess, but DEI helps remove barriers to student learning by providing, and when we had those groups, for example, like the Pride group, or we have Hispanic student organization, or things like that, that students felt comfortable being and know they weren't alone and would work together and actually have those opportunities that other groups already had naturally, or because they weren't discriminated against. some people think DEI increases free speech because a wider range of voices feel safe to participate. So often, one of the things was talk about having a safe space to express yourself and not feel like you're going to be discriminated against or taken down if you express yourself. So that was one of the things DEI worked on. Now let's look at the arguments against DEI. So a lot of times people say, oh, you probably heard a bunch of liberal woke people in those universities, you know, that are not treating people well and indoctrinating our students or something like that. Well, let's see what kind of is behind that. So a lot of times DEI efforts are thought to be unfair or discriminatory, that, hey, look, I didn't discriminate against anyone. Why am I the one that's not getting into a college or university? You know, I had better test scores. I had better grades. I didn't get into Harvard, but this person who is Hispanic or this person who is black got into that school. That's not fair. And so that's fine. A lot of people see it as kind of a reverse discrimination going on. Next, DEI efforts interfere with excellence at college campuses. So again, if you're allowing people in who aren't as, don't have the grades, don't have the test scores, then they're not going to be as smart, so you don't have the excellence. Also, a lot of times, I found this as an instructor. It drove me crazy. You got to be understanding of your students. My students are in here going, yeah, you should be understanding. You know, I like this. What are you talking about? You know, take it easy on them. Be understanding. I'm like, what are you talking about? Do the work. I'll understand when you do the work and you do it well. How about that? And they're like, no, you can't say that. Why can't I say that? You know, it's like, so some of that is, where's the excellence? And so we had in our mission statement, equity and excellence before the change. Well, some said, looks contradictory to me. Not sure it is, but that was a claim being made. All right. DEI limits free speech. So we saw before, some people said it expands free speech, but a lot of people said, no, I don't feel comfortable speaking because I'm not supposed to speak if somebody else feels uncomfortable with what I'm saying. And I know because I disagree with you, you're going to say, I don't feel comfortable hearing that. Or I can't criticize you because that will make me feel unsafe. And so a lot of people are like, I don't feel like I can express myself. And so that was a concern. DEI fosters anger and distrust. We saw this maybe, Charlie Kirk would put forward some things that, hey, this is why young men are angry, is because of these DEI efforts that make them feel like they're the victim. And so that creates anger and distrust. DEI makes people feel guilty about their history. A lot of times we say, hey, why are we here? Why is this discrimination here? Let's point out the discrimination that's happened. Let's talk about Jim Crow laws. Let's talk about slavery. And a lot of people said, God, I feel guilty. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with it either. Why are you making me feel guilty for something I didn't do? This is wrong. Well, maybe you're in a position, I think a reply is, maybe you're in a position of power and privilege because of what your ancestors did, even if you're not discriminating yourself. And, of course, there's still lots of discrimination in society. And people didn't want to hear about it. DEI efforts are costly and result in administrative bloat. Not you. But that's as often saying, hey, what we have seen over time, I see my former colleague Blair Morrissey here, I think there's a lot more administrators now than there were when you started probably in the 70s. And so we've seen the rise of administration at colleges and universities. It's much bigger than it used to be. And a lot of people blame DEI, at least for part of that. Maybe it's a good thing, but that's what often people see. And a lot of times other people say DEI has not resulted in meaningful change. We have not seen change. You know, you talk about it, you do all these efforts, but people are still discriminatory, even though you have that implicit bias training. And there's something to this in that it's hard to quantify how much people change even with these policies in place. But let me just give you a couple statistics. One is in 1976, 15% of African Americans attended institutions of higher education. Now it's 45%. There has been improvement. Also, one of the biggest, we often think about affirmative action, you think race, but actually it's white women who've benefited the most. 58% of all college students are women. Now, what is the concern? The concern is, why aren't men going to college? And that's the concern. So that's something to think about as well. So those are the arguments for and against. Put them out there for you. But I think maybe it's time. Follow up from Ken. How about that?
We do want to hear from those of you that are here, and we thank you for coming out. I just want to, if you could indulge me for 3 minutes, and then we get to Q&A. So one of the things I talked about, actually answering the question, is DEI dead? And I said, it can't die because we're human. And so I shared with you, and these are just some of those dimensions of diversity that just exist because we're human. So again, when we hear the word diversity, we tend to think about race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomics. Those are part of the diversity framework, but that's just a small piece. Do we often talk about ability, disability, age, religion, beliefs, our geographic location? And these aren't exhaustive, but just something to think about. And as I mentioned, what about diversity of thought, our education, our political ideologies, our communication style, our work and life experiences? Those are all dimensions of diversity that we have to consider. So DEI can't die. And so the other part of that question, is it dead or evolving? I would say it's evolving, or at a minimum shifting, because now in the circles that I walk in higher education, I hear words like student belonging, inclusive excellence, compliance, student success. Take out words like race and Hispanic and Latino and just say all. Make sure we're doing everything for all, which was the intent. So it is indeed evolving. And then Dr. Wible alluded to this. Why did we respond the way that we did? Because it asked the question, legality, legal restrictions, as opposed to our moral obligation or responsibility. Which one did we choose? And we can make an argument for both. And then finally, before we get to the questions, at least for me, is I don't care as much because I care about Muskegon Community College. We kind of have a saying here, 3 S's. We want students to start, to stay, and succeed. And all students, we want to experience that. So as long as the success is being measured, I, as an individual, am not as concerned about office or titles, but I am concerned about outcomes, graduation rates, and post-college success. So that is what I wanted to add before we get to Q&A. And I don't mind bringing you a microphone. And
What questions do people have? Raise your hand. Happy to. Who wants to get us started? Not all at once, please, of course. What do you have? Question? Are you proud of what's going on?
So listening, and I appreciate you guys bringing up some of these ideologies and thought-provoking questions. My question is, wasn't America founded on DEI?
Wasn't America founded on DEI? I think the answer is yes, and Ken, you can answer as well, but I think the answer is in some ways yes, in some ways no. Of course, when you say America was founded, do you mean when we moved everyone off their land and took over? And is that what we mean? What do we talk about the founding of America?
Yeah, no, when Europeans were like, oh man, I don't want to pray to your God, or I don't want to,
right.
you guys are doing wrong over here, King George, I don't like you, oh man, you're prosecuting me because of my religious ideologies.
Okay. Yeah.
It wasn't the basis of America formed on DEI ideologies.
Well, I think it's maybe respect for religious beliefs, but I'm not sure. I think the ideal of America from like our founding fathers was one of accepting people's differences to an extent, but and celebrating people's differences. And so when I hear, actually, Ken, you said it a couple times, and I know you're promoting what's kind of the current thing, which is all students are important. All students, and remember it was what Black Lives Matter. What about all lives matter? Well, yeah, the problem was that black people were being the ones that police were going after unjustly. It was not fair. So, as someone used an analogy, if someone has a broken bone, and they say, my broken bone matters, they say, well, don't all bones matter? Yeah, well, this one that's broken matters a little more right now because you need to address this problem. And that's why Black Lives Matters, I think, was important. So go to our founding fathers. They had slaves. Only certain people could vote. Women couldn't vote. You had to have land or be fairly wealthy, So they had these general ideals, but I don't think in reality it was founded on DEI like we think of it today.
Thank you for starting the discussion. I appreciate that. I don't have much to add to that other than something to think about from that context, because that's why I'm glad you clarified, because there are certain conversations about indigenous native people and Columbus, but you're talking about when Europeans settled here. To flee religious persecution, and then if you read in your history, how long did it take for the same people that flee religious persecution to start practicing religious persecution? It's a question to ask, and then I'll throw one thing out. My undergraduate is from a historically black university, and I went through public school education in California, and then and there was so much I didn't know, and I realized that I didn't see things that shaped the world. No one that looked like me shaped our world, and I didn't learn that until I got to college, and so that was the thing. And so one quick analogy, I went back to my U.S. history high school course, and I remember what we went through. In that U.S. history, there was no mention of slavery. They did mention Crispus Attucks as firing a shot in the American Revolution. Civil rights was one of the shortest chapters in the book, and where they said two people, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, were instrumental in the movement. And then we kind of got into the space race and some other things. And so when I look back at, that those are things there, so it shapes how we see the world when we only see it through one lens. So that's my answer to your question, more anecdotal. Who has the next question?
So I was wondering, with the actual name of the DEI being taken down everywhere, do you think that we are still promoting DEI in the school? I mean, we still have the GSA and clubs that encourage diversity, and the Jayhawk Hub and a food pantry and stuff like that. Do you think that the name has just been taken away and there's still the actual efforts here? Do you feel like the efforts to promote diversity are being taken away?
Yeah, and Dr. Wible, feel free to add to this. So one of the things, that, we took the stance to pause DEI, and so we changed some narratives. But when it comes to things like student organizations, What we added was it's open to anyone, that's there. So we can still acknowledge our Hispanic student organization. We can still acknowledge our Black student organization, but it's open to anyone. So anyone can attend those meetings that they choose to, because it's not discriminatory in any way, and it's just going to highlight and promote those things. So that was our response. We're not going to, what's the right word, minimalize people to express themselves in certain ways, but we just want to make sure everyone has the same opportunity and access. So what wouldn't happen is you can only go to this club if you're from a certain group. We don't do that. But here's the group we want to acknowledge, celebrate, promote, educate, and anyone can come to that, even though this one is promoting something specific.
I got a different view on this, but it's a great question. And that's that I've been advisor for the GSA, which is a Gender and Sexuality Alliance, used to be Gay Straight Alliance. It's always been open to everybody. And I think all the clubs on campus have been. That hasn't changed. We just maybe put it there so if federal people look at it, they can see that it's there. But it's always been that way. And I think, why is the college allowing the Hispanic Club? Why is the college allowing the GSA and other groups? Because they have to. Law requires it. If the students want to form a club like that, they got to allow it. There'd be a lawsuit if they didn't. So it's not like it's out of the goodness of their heart. They have to allow it. Another thing is, I was, last year, Ken marched in the Pride Parade. And GSA students and several different people from the college were there. It was great. And I was like, hey, there's a bunch of college-age kids down there, or ones that are in high school, thousands of them. It's a great place to go and recruit. This year, it didn't happen. And I remember, but the club was there. Our club was there. So the college said, oh, we had representation. Yeah, no thanks to you. I remember I was walking to the parade. We helped get our booth set up, and I was walking to the parade, and I saw a student, and a student said, I didn't think you'd be here. And I said, what, me? I said, no, the college, because I had on my, bring it out t-shirt. And they're like, I didn't think we'd see you here. I said, yeah, we're here. We got a booth. Come see us, and we'll be in the parade. I'll be in the parade. And they said, okay, I'm going in the fall. I'm glad to see you. And I was like, thank God we were there. But the college wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for the students who did it on their own. And so that was very disappointing. I think you might say, well, that's what the college has to do given the current administration and the fear of losing funds. But again, other schools still celebrate Pride and say, hey, we're not discriminating against anyone. We're just celebrating Pride, just as we would celebrate other months and people and things like that, Native Americans or things like that. So that's my view on that. But it's a great question. I think the college could be doing more. And I think, yeah, some of it is on hold. Another thing the college did, not to pick on it too much, is, but we had a diversity wall, and now it's like an excellence wall or something, I don't know. But it was like, we can't even say diversity. We can't celebrate that. But I hope we do. And so far, it hasn't affected our classes. We still have a variety of classes that are quite diverse in nature, but and it hasn't affected what faculty say in their classes, although Turning Point, which is Charlie Kirk's organization, or now his wife's, they encourage people to video their professors. Don't do it, please. But video their professors and send in anything that they might find objectionable. So anyways, I can say more, but I'll stop there. Any other thoughts? Oh, sorry, here we go.
So the bullet point says here, the third from the bottom is, DEI makes people feel guilty about their history. And so I did a little facilitation at Grand Valley while I was there, and it was on white fragility. And so it makes me wonder, have we here at MCC, between students or staff, experience where there is some of that white fragility, and being that people are afraid to talk about their history because on the one side is it's not as if, and we can just talk about African Americans. It's not as if like where we are now we're saying we're mad at you because of what happened. I've never been a slave. But my family may have experienced some of those things. And you talked about how being behind kind of puts us in a position where we have to work twice as hard a lot of times to get half of what others have gotten, maybe been born into. So have we experienced that here on campus where people are just afraid to talk about it or even hear about it because of I didn't experience that type of a mindset, if that makes sense, and maybe even just not feeling bad about it or guilty about it at all, or there's a lack of just wanting to understand. So.
Let me tell you what I heard in your statement, and thank you for bringing that out. As a person that used to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion on behalf of organizations, one of the things you did, so if you recall, if you were here, 3Ds, discourse, dialogue, dissemination of information. So one, to have a mutual exchange of thoughts, and then me individually, when I'm having those deep conversations, I try not to vilify a person for what they know, don't believe, don't believe. And then even if we have differing views, we can agree to disagree and stay respectful. But the other thing that I add to that is we need to have those conversations. So if I were to make it, this is an argument why we need to have rooms full of different ideologies to have these conversations so we know how to have proper discourse and dialogue. So safety and comfort are two different things. A room can be safe and be uncomfortable. Change happens through discomfort. But we need to be brave enough to have those spaces. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sure Dr. Wible wants to add, is when I have conversations about the reality of where we are, and when we look back, it's not about shame or blame or guilt in the moment, but when we look back, it's painful and it hurts. But that's part of the learning process. That's my take.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, and thanks for the good question. I think I'd love to hear from others on white fragility or feeling guilt and whatnot. Let me just give you two kind of anecdotes. A couple of times in maybe the last 5 years, I've had a student say, be a little brave or naive and say something like, well, I must admit I've grown up in a family that was probably a little racist, but I like colored people. And it's like, ooh. But I'm glad they said it, but I could see other students going, keep your mouth shut, you shouldn't talk that way. But I mean, that's how you learn and it was good that person said that to learn. And they actually thought they were being, advanced compared to their parents. And here's how maybe the current administration's changed things a little bit now, and maybe it will. We will see a little more people being a little more strident. I hope my neighbors don't watch this, but I didn't know my neighbors were a little bit racist until like a week ago, and I was talking to them, over the fence, and they said, oh, I was at Meyer, and they were talking about this person and how going on and on about him, and then I said, I'm just kind of listening, and then I said, and I think you know what background they're from, and I was like, okay, thank you for that, and so I was like, okay, well, and I think maybe, a year ago they wouldn't have made that comment, because they would have felt afraid to, but now they're emboldened to. maybe that's a good thing, because again, maybe you can reply to it, maybe you can try to make some inroads, especially in a college discussion. It's a little tougher when you gotta live next to them, but, my neighbor, and they're elderly. But I think on college campuses, it's good to have that open dialogue where we can learn from each other, and it's all right to make mistakes, and grow from it.
In those examples, Dylan, I'll be real brief. That's, to me, another argument why we need to have discourse and dialogue. So if someone is trying to do better and we have the tools to help that person, it will be there. So I would respond to someone that used that language without calling them out, calling them in. Hey, are you aware if you say something like that in the wrong setting, you might trigger something that you don't want to have happen to you? So you can say person of color, or you can say the race of the person that they are, but if you call someone a colored person in the wrong context, that could have a bad outcome. So it could be a teachable moment, but we have to have the tools to help people speak up and to call people in as opposed to calling them out.
In that moment, where you just explained that second part there, that's where we need you step up, right? You are an ally at that point to kind of softly push back and say, well, what did you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, it leads to the conversation you're speaking of, but when we remain, and I'm not calling you, I want to call you in on it, but when you remain mum on situations like that, then it allows them to continue to feel that way and lets them kind of advancing that conversation and helping in that space. So, and as people of color need that. So,
Good point, good point.
So I just wanted to say that I love the concept of calling people in, as Ken introduced me to when he came to do a presentation in one of my classes. I love that idea because I do think we need to be more gentle with each other. There's like tensions are so high, that we have to like calm ourselves down and see, like, as I believe in some circles when you're talking about these things, some people say intent doesn't matter. I know Ken has said many times, and he believes that intent does matter. I do too. I think we all make mistakes. We're all human. It's an opportunity to call each other in and address those things in a kind way. But I really wanted to comment on the white fragility, white guilt issue, which I find really interesting and somewhat strange and amusing because, there's a sentiment that, like, no one can make you feel anything. It's a choice you have. You give them power when you feel a certain way. So white guilt is not coming from the diverse population. It's coming from within. It's coming. You feel guilty, and you should look and reflect why. But ultimately, I think the white guilt is pretty useless because it's irrelevant, really. You have nothing to feel guilty about what your parents or your forefathers have done. You weren't part of that. You had no choice. You came in much later. What you should and could and what you could and should feel guilty about is the refusal to acknowledge the true history of this country and to continue to move forward as if those things aren't true and don't happen. That's something you should look at and feel guilty about, perhaps, and maybe try to address and change. But feeling guilty about what your forefathers did is, in my opinion, rather useless. Use that to catalyze yourself into learning more, being part of discussions like this, and showing up and becoming part of diverse spaces where you can have those opportunities to learn and grow. And I've been a part of a lot of them for decades, and often I'm the only white person who shows up. And you can see, like, even this room is not that populated right now. We could have a lot more people here. And people notice, like, look who's showing up. Look how few white people are here for this discussion. And it's like, these are the people who need it the most. Like, critical race theory could really help save a lot of this country and help us heal. But of course, we're working to get rid of it anywhere we can. So it's the absurdities of all this, to keep certain power structures in place and stuff. But I think white guilt is really kind of useless. Like, so what? You feel guilty. And also, I've heard expressed in many groups, like, nobody wants your white guilt, right? You shouldn't be here being part of these things to be out of guilt. You should be here because it's the right, just, humane thing to do. You do it because you have a good moral compass and you love humanity and all people and respect the differences, and you embrace it and you have curiosity about it. So I just think white guilt is fairly useless, in my opinion.
So I grew up in Central Texas, and white students were the minority where I went to school. African American and Hispanic students were a majority of our population, and looking back from 2020, looking back to where I grew up, I was so grateful for the diversity that I grew up around. In 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement was so big and such a controversial topic, I remember one of the students that I had went to school with once we moved to Michigan had made a post online asking when his white privilege card was going to come in the mail. And that, to kind of go off what Dylan said, that is what made me feel guilty. Just how close-minded that individual could be, and just that was like the turning point that really made me grateful for how diverse my childhood was and just the things that I saw growing up. One of my favorite memories was I was in 8th grade, and in my theater class, my friend Latavia and I were doing makeup, and I had my makeup bag out, and I was doing hers, and without even thinking, I had like swatched some of my foundation on her face, and she was African American, and obviously her skin was darker than mine, and it wasn't even a thought when we were doing the makeup. So I don't really have any questions, but I'm very grateful for the diverse environment I had growing up.
That's great, yeah. I mean, I grew up, we had two African American kids in my entire school. You know, that was, and they had been adopted. So it was just kind of almost the opposite, you know, as far as, and I think one of the things with white privilege is to sometimes realize it and not, and I sometimes recognize it, and I say, hey, why don't I go do that? Because white privilege, I think I'll get away with it, where other people won't. I remember after 2001, after 9/11, in that December, I went on a little trip with my father, and we were at the airport, and prior to 9/11, you could just kind of walk on the plane. There wasn't a lot of security. And we went through the detectors, and my father's like, I thought they would like pat us down and stuff. I'd heard about all this at the airport and how much security there was. That was pretty easy. And I said, they're not looking for us, Dad. He says, what do you mean? I said, white privilege. And he's like, oh, I see what you mean there, yeah. So, but you should recognize that. So, yeah, not everyone has the same experience you have. You might have a special ability because of your privilege.
And if I could interject, so this was scheduled till 3:30. That's going to be respectful. Or is it 4?
But
Oh, I thought, was it 4? I had 3:30. My bad. I just
we got the room till 5 if you want. No.
I just didn't know. Again, I apologize. So I want to be respectful of time. So we haven't had a question from this side of the room, if I could be so bold.
Now you guys are bringing up like movements and pretty much modern day things. We were talking about 2025. And you guys' professional opinion, why wasn't All Lives Matters at Charlie Kirk's event? Or like, where I know we're talking about DEI, but why don't you think that organization isn't prevalent? Didn't somebody lose their life? Ain't their mission that all lives matter? Why don't you think that they were prevalent at this big event that just happened? If you understand what I'm saying.
Why wasn't All Lives Matter prevalent?
Or like, where is that organization? Yeah.
I guess I don't know enough. Do you?
I was going to say just the things that I stream and watch, so I didn't see a lot of those celebration of life ceremonies for that individual. But the one thing that is said, and Dr. Wible alluded to it though, again, the importance of being able to have discourse, dialogue, and disseminate information is to dispel those myths. So the phrase critical race theory came up. And a lot of people will say, oh, you know, they think DEI is synonymous. They think diversity, equity, inclusion is synonymous with critical race theory. One, it's not. And when people take that narrative, they won't do it. And so, you know, going back to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I have permission to tell this story. I was in a class with someone, and this is someone, he was doing fine, but he used this analogy. So this really happened to him. He was at home. He said him and his wife were getting dressed for bed, and he said he just got short of breath. And he said he had to sit down on the side of the bed for a minute, and then all of a sudden, as he got short of breath, he had this sharp pain shooting down his arm, and he couldn't breathe. And of course, they lived very close to an emergency room. His wife said, let me just take you right now. So they went to the emergency room, and when they got there, they told the people that was going on, and they immediately sat him in a room, and they hooked him up to a monitor. And then the lady said, I am getting ready to call a code on you. And she said, everybody in this department, in this area is going to stop what they're doing and come help you because you're having a heart attack. All right? And so he tells that story. When he got to the emergency room, there were people there ahead of him. And when they hooked him up to the monitors, you know, at that point in time, his heart attack was more severe than someone that had done something else. But it wasn't that anyone else was less important, it was his thing. So that was his message when he had those dialogue moments to tell people, when you say Black Lives Matter, it's not about other lives don't matter, it's just right now we need to draw attention to this. And then the other now, but I'm saying this comes through dialogue and sharing things. So I don't know particularly what you referenced, but I know we could talk about other things if we are open to having discussion. Last one is the fire truck analogy, same thing. All houses are important, but the fire truck drives past how many houses to get to the one that's on fire? You know, that type of thing. Yeah. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dr. Wible.
No, is there a question?
Oh, no, I just saw a hand up.
Oh,
Yeah.
So I know I'm not one of the people leading this panel, but I think I have an answer for your question, Justin. It's just, like, to me, All Lives Matter is a reactionary movement, if you can even call it a movement. So I think it's a reactionary voice of saying, oh no, we can't have that, you know, especially from the colonial white, you know, kind of culture that's trying to grasp for our political power so much. So there was no such effort until Black Lives Matter arose. So now they're like, oh, we can't have Black Lives Matter, so we've got to have All Lives Matter because White Lives Matter is going to sound too controversial, so they generalize it to All Lives Matter. So I think they're not present at something like Charlie Kirk's wake because they only formed to counter Black Lives Matter. They're not really all about all lives matter. They're not. All white lives matter. It's like that's in the parentheses, you know. So as soon as Black Lives Matter started to fade out of the headlines, all lives matter started to fade as well. And so we don't really hear from them anymore, you know. That's my feeling about it.
Are there any further questions? Well, while you're thinking of it, I didn't actually finish, and now that Dr. Brown and Dr. Roddy are here, I would, but no, I didn't really talk about the future of DEI, and I wanted to say a couple of things that I haven't gotten to say yet. And that's, I think, what I hope is the future of DEI. I hope that we resume programs helping groups traditionally discriminated against and currently discriminated against to create equal opportunity, even add to them. So when I say add to them, how about mentioned at college campuses, like one of the focuses on males, because males aren't doing as well as females in higher ed. Let's add that group. That's fine with me. You know, just as we have a Hispanic group or African American group and pride group and things like that. Whoa, how'd that go that way? Did you see that? I don't know. We should celebrate differences while being committed to equal opportunity and realize that sometimes treating people differently leads to equal opportunity. And we shouldn't think that you have to treat everyone equally in order to have equal opportunity. Recognize that DEI efforts are not all about preferential treatment, that diversity helps the overall good, as I mentioned earlier. and avoid suppression of speech and encourage discussion of controversial issues. I think on both sides there has been suppression of speech. There has been suppression of speech by people who are pushing DEI and proponents of it. I think safe spaces often discourage speech as much as they encourage speech. So I think that needs to change. I also think that current efforts to end DEI suppress speech. There are currently 29 states that have anti-DEI laws. 38 laws in place, 29 states. I was at Ohio at a conference when they signed into law theirs. It went into effect a little later, but their law, SB 1, eliminated DEI, and it regulates discussion on controversial topics, which I gotta tell you is about every topic I teach in philosophy. And I was like, thank God I'm not in Ohio, I couldn't teach. So, things like abortion, things about capital punishment, all these hot button issues that are around for a long time, I guess we're not supposed to talk about them. Or it's gonna be very difficult to talk about them. And they also then include other things like immigration, climate change, that you're not supposed to talk about those either because they're controversial. So then you're like, well, is climate change really controversial? Or that they've declared that it is. There are other things that they eliminate centers for marginalized students, eliminates race, sex, and ethnicity-based scholarships, things like that. I hope we don't in Michigan have such laws, and I hope we fight against these types of laws that limit discussion in higher ed and limit the ability of higher ed to create a welcoming and just environment.
And I do want to respond to that last one where you said avoid suppression of speech and encourage discussion of controversial issues. Again, just my lens at this college, Dr. Wible, you bring different topics through the lecture series here. And I think this is a great way to have controversial issue discussion topics. But I want to remind people, as an institution that does support free speech, freedom of expression, when an issue comes up that might be opposite of your view, there are ways to respond. One, and we've had issues here since I've been on this campus. We've had pro-life, pro-choice debates and different things like that. So when those things come up that might be opposite of the view you hold, you have an opportunity to either go and listen, to protest peacefully, because we do that, or publicly if that is allowed for a dialogue back and forth, or to not go. And the reason I put that last one in there, sometimes, people that had the opposing view would complain and say, oh, why are we doing this? I don't think we should do this. And we have to remind them that, this is free speech, free expression, and those are your options. You can go and listen. You can go and protest peacefully. You can, engage in dialogue, or you can choose not to go. So I just remember there's lots of ways to respond to those controversial issues.
Yeah. Further questions? By the way, Turning Point, we used to have a chapter on campus, and they brought in a speaker who was on abortion, anti-abortion speaker, pretty strongly anti-abortion. She goes around the country speaking, and I don't know, someone came to me and said, are we going to try to stop this? I said, no, I'm going. I'm going to ask a question, too. And I didn't agree with the person, but I thought it was fine they were here, and I enjoyed asking them a question.
Hello, everyone. So I don't really have a question, just more of a comment. I just want to thank you all for putting this discussion on the table for your lecture series. So I work here at MCC, but I also work at another higher education institution. And when all of that happened earlier in the year, when you all received the letter and saw that email mission statement changing and all of that, I didn't know what to feel about that. Being a Black woman, feeling connected to what DEI represents, and my other institution doing the opposite, not, changing anything. So it was good to hear the perspective of how the changes that were made, the most important thing is the students and enrollment, and looking at it from that perspective. So I just appreciate you all giving me another perspective and way of looking at that. So it kind of changes my feelings about the whole thing. Because, sir, I was like you, or you was like, hell no, we're not doing anything. So I see it in a different light now. And I understood it, or kind of thought that was the reasoning, but it's just good to get the breakdown, the percentage of how, the federal government, helps this situation with keeping people in school. So just wanted to thank you guys for being brave and just sharing. That's all.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the college is not alone. I looked on the Chronicle of Higher Education. There's about 400 other schools that acted like we did throughout the country, both universities and community colleges and colleges. So, and a lot of you in the room rely on federal funding for your education. So it is a big issue. But I hope we look for ways, and maybe this is one way, to say, hey, we don't like it, and we're going to do stuff to help students and still work on things like equity as much as we can, and not just suddenly turn the ship away from what we were doing. So.
This is a good segue. Do you mind putting up my slide with the contact information up for it? Just one of the things, we are in the process, the college is developing its next strategic plan. And the strategic plan is made up of multiple domains. I happen to be chairing one of those domains, and it's called, excuse me, Student Success for All, right now, AKA Equity. But I could use a student voice on that domain. And we meet once a month virtually, and we have several months to come up with the recommendation we want to make to our strategic plan, which will be unveiled in 2026. So if anybody is interested, and especially students, in being a part of that domain, send me an email or give me a phone call. Email's faster. Send me an email, give me a phone call, and we can see if that's something that works out. So I just wanted to put that shameless plug out there.
What are the 3 Ds and what does each mean? Then we'll get to.
Okay, yes, 3 Ds. Discourse, dialogue, dissemination of information. So discourse, that's that mutuality back and forth. Dialogue, and for me, that's keeping it civil, and respectful, and then dissemination of information. So when I engage in controversial conversations with someone, I respect them enough to hear their point, and if they want to share something with me to check out, I'll check it out, and I ask the same in return.
15 years ago, I was close to retirement philosophy instructor here, and I got involved with College Success Seminar, which was a program to try to enhance people whose skills, learning skills, were less than maybe some other people's skills. And incidentally, when I studied that stuff, I mean, that wasn't my field, I just got interested in it because I noticed something about people who would not do well in my philosophy classes. Everything we taught in that College Success Seminar was exciting for me to learn as a person and then try to teach. I had invented my own way to take notes, but it wasn't as good as what people who had studied that had developed. And just one other example there. There are students who come to college in the United States and they really think the colleges are party schools. And so the rule that we taught, and I thought it was not adequate, but the rule that we taught was for each hour in the classroom, expect to spend at least 2 hours doing outside work. And I won't make this distinction much here, but there are some college courses where you can be really disadvantaged because of your past. And then there are others maybe much less so. Chemistry would be one where you can be really disadvantaged. Math, you can be really disadvantaged. At any rate, I taught college success seminar, and there was a colleague friend who got really mad at me because he thought minorities were in the college success seminar more than they were. I don't think they were disproportionately there. The students I had back then tended to be nursing student wannabes, and the nursing program had sort of twisted arms to get their students into this preparatory thing, which I wish I had had as a college student. I had to invent it. I would have liked to have been taught that, and I had a very privileged high school background. So the suggestion that this was just for unprepared people is false. But wow, could you learn a lot of things about learning? I think our textbook was Learning to Learn. Okay, so people who then were interested back 15 years ago, no longer at MCC, one in particular, and a friend, social friend, got extremely angry with me for thinking this was appropriate because it would identify a population that was allegedly not as well prepared as other populations. And that just made him froth, screamed at me in the hallway one time. So my question for both of you presenters today is, well, first to say, I like diversity and inclusion and whatever the other one is, with small d's. And I've relished when I go to Toronto and all those different communities and all that sort of thing where we have much greater diversity than here in Muskegon. But so with small letters, those terms are all important. But as soon as you make them capital, this, that, and the other thing, it becomes a name of something that is related to the concepts without the capital letters, but can then become its own problem, as evidenced by the fact the government has caused some of these problems you guys have been talking about. So here's my question for you. We started off suggesting that some people are not as well prepared as others. I think that's true. And there is, some people are much more privileged. We don't have to suggest that that correlates with race or other things, but I guess I would suggest it correlates a bit with money and college background of the parents and all kinds of stuff. My question for the two of you is, what is MCC doing today to try to help people who are not as well prepared to succeed in those college classes that do presume certain rather high competencies coming out of high school? Have we killed those programs too, or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah, some of that's, Ken, you can answer too, but some of that's unfortunate with funding of college. So like the College Success Seminar, the state government doesn't want to pay for it. And so it's not required, it's an option, and then a lot of people don't choose it if they got to pay for it, because it doesn't really advance your degree. And so that's a problem. I think we've seen with what we used to call remedial classes, now college success classes, for like math and English, is they don't exist anymore, because again, they weren't really preparing people. You know, you go through a K-12 system and you've got, I don't know, an 8th grade reading level, and then you come to MCC and maybe we got you to a 9th grade reading level, but you're still not to the college reading level. And so they said, why are we spending our time on these classes when a very small percentage make it to college level classes and graduate? And so they just got rid of them. But now we just throw those students into the fire with every other student. Now the idea is they'll pull themselves up, but I think what happens is we pull ourselves down and we say, well, I'm not going to fail half my students, so I'm going to lower my standards, and that's bad. And so I think that's really problematic, and that we need to bring those classes back. Are there other ways we're helping? Yeah, with scholarships and programs that make college free for people. We've got our Jayhawk Hub that provides all type of services so people have access to food and other support services that they might not have had before. So we are trying to do things, for sure.
And I'll add to that. I'm not faculty. I work on administrative side of things, but we pay attention to what we think is important. So I'm going to answer more anecdotally. So we know that students that do well in those core requisite classes at the beginning tend to do well later. So my answer to that is, are we meeting students where they're at? And that is, I'm talking 360. So one, and I've heard this on this campus in the 4 years I've been here, how do we tear down through that lens, small d, small e, small I, if you want to, though I'm not going to make assumptions. Oh, that student came from this district, and they're not going to do well in my class. And so how do we tear that perception down? Because how is that affecting the overall thing? How do we meet each student where they're at and give them the tools that they need to be successful? So that is the one thing that I'm there. And then there's the other piece that you talked about, before they get here. Familiarity, brings about awareness. And so if you're not familiar with what a student that has a food need, a transportation need, a housing insecurity, is there, they're not worried about the rigor if they don't have those, actualization needs met, those primary needs met. So it all works together. And the last one that I use, this is a K-12 example, but I remember, and this is a dated article, but I remember reading an article, and it stuck out to me when they were talking about the discrepancies in socioeconomics. This wasn't about race, and socioeconomics in correlation to standardized test. And if you've ever taken a test in your lifetime, tree is to forest like grass is to park, one of those things. And so they would ask these students these tests, so where would you most likely, and this was the example, use this device? And it was a sailboat. And they had things like regatta, all these things, and there's no way a student would correlate that in high school if they'd never been exposed to boating. And it was just, so it had nothing so they were being standardized on this test, saying that they were low, and you're asking about a concept that they couldn't relate. So how do we take that concept at this level and say, how do we meet everyone where they're at so that they can do what they want to do? And maybe it starts with, hey, these co-requisite courses, we need to give you those foundational skills. Maybe it's giving you the tools. Maybe it's what the professors are saying or not saying so that they can align to the work. So it's really what came first, the chicken or the egg, but how do we still make sure we are as successful? Because the one thing we are a community college. People are going to come here because we're in the community. So how do we meet their needs? So I've been encouraged. If you are not aware, tomorrow we have a program. It's 2 repeat programs. You can come at 11 a.m. or 4:30 p.m. in Collegiate Hall. It's called MCC Cares. And just for coming, there will be food and MCC gifts for everyone. If you stay to the end, because there are going to be some presentations from our tutoring area and our student services area. But it's just to make everyone aware about the tools we provide to help you stay and succeed here at college. If you stay to the end of those presentations, about 35 minutes, those that remain must be present to win. There are some awesome prizes that will be raffled off at the end. But everyone that comes will get food and an MCC and some MCC gear.
And I think we'll wrap it up here today. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. I hope to see you at future events. part of the MCC lecture series. Feel free to grab a snack and a water as you leave, and travel safely. Take care. Thank you, Ken. Good job.